Okay, well, here we are having another spirited, friendly Metroid chat. I am joined by my very good friend, Joey Ferris from Game Explain. Joey, say hi to the people.
Hi to the people.
The people say hi back
Oh,
because,
sweet.
yes, this is probably, I think I want to say the third or fourth Metroid focus video I've made in the past week. I'm really trying to ramp up my conversations around Metroid because it's my favorite thing to talk about. And with Joey, a fellow Super Metroid fan, also I know one of your favorite things to talk about. And we tweet a lot about it and we DM a lot about it. And it's an interesting time because obviously everything around Metroid is pretty mysterious. We had Metroid Prime Remastered earlier in the year, which was fantastic. And I know, Joey, both you and I really, really loved that game. But we are constantly waiting for anything significant around Metroid Prime 4. And so the topic that I talked to Joey about and decided it would make a really fun conversation for you guys to hear us discuss is the very crazy situation around the Switch 2 feeling like it's something that's coming in the nearest future, right? There's stuff being talked about every day. I feel like it's 6 to 18 months away from probably releasing, right?
Right.
And yeah, and with that comes the mystery around how Metroid Prime 4 may or may not factor in to a Nintendo Switch 2 release, if it's going to be a cross-generational release, if it's only Switch 2, if it's only Switch, and all these things. And so, to hand it off to you, Joey, the main kind of thesis and point of this conversation is whether or not Metroid Prime 4 becomes a cross-generational release, or if it ends up skipping the Nintendo Switch entirely. And so, I'm going to ask you, Joey, do you think, before we ask whether or not you like or dislike this, let me just ask you this. Do you think there's a chance that Prime 4 might skip the current Switch entirely and be only Switch 2? What likelihood do you feel like that is that it could happen that way?
There is only one situation where I see this happening, and that's if, for some awful reason, Metroid Prime 4 takes like 10 years to develop. But if it comes out so far into the future from now to the point where the current Switch is irrelevant, that's the only acceptable situation where I see it skipping the Switch is reasonable. But also just the fact that if we're waiting that long at that point, that's unreasonable and that's not okay.
Yeah. So basically you mean if it's kind of going through what we would guess would be a development hell behind the scenes, so that even though the game was rebooted in 2019, it's more than a 4 or 5 year development cycle. Maybe it would be like an 8 or 9 year cycle. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, if that's like the worst case. Obviously the worst case scenario would be if it got canceled. But like the second
that's
worst
not gonna
case
happen,
scenario. No, absolutely not. Not after they announced it and made everyone happy. Like that cannot happen.
I always find it very interesting, and I'm sure you see it a lot, on your Twitter feed and on your guys' videos on Game Explained, how many people really will sometimes believe that Prime 4 just could be outright canceled. I hear it a lot in my videos when I talk about Metroid or I make theories and predictions about Prime 4, simply because it's been mysterious for so long, which obviously is super frustrating. You and I talk about that all the time, how hard it is to still be wondering about this game. But I just feel like people can feel pretty comfortable knowing the game isn't canceled. If they were willing to just address fans back in 2019 when they rebooted it, something I've mentioned on my videos many times over the years, that is such a level of transparency from Nintendo that is unprecedented. We've never seen them do anything like that, especially for bad news. And so to me, that just told me there's no way they would ever abandon this project no matter what happens.
No, and it does frustrate me when I hear people say like, "Oh, the game's canceled. Oh, the game's never coming out," and that's part of what just leads me to being frustrated. Like, I'm frustrated with Nintendo more than anyone. Just the fact that I'm not disappointed. I am disappointed with the fact that the development got restarted, but I'm grateful that they didn't just up and cancel it or anything. Right? Glad they decided to do that instead of release a crappy product. Right? But just the fact that they've been leaving us in silence for so long, but at the same time, they've been giving us 3 or 4 trailers over 2 or 3 years for Tears of the Kingdom. But for some reason, they can't do the same thing for Prime 4. It just bugs me. And it's just the poor messaging behind this game. There's no messaging at all. Just makes people more frustrated with this. And yeah, lately, I feel like my frustration with this game has been peak. I think it had a lot to do with that last Nintendo Direct in June of just not hearing anything about it. Because at that point, Tears of the Kingdom was out, Pikmin 4 was about to be out, and now that Pikmin 4 is out, it's just like, okay, now there's one more thing. There's only one thing I care about on the Switch, and you're not telling me about it. And I'm just extremely disappointed. And just the fact that all this cross-gen, next-gen talk is happening just makes me even more disappointed that this game was announced in 2017 when the Switch came out, and we had to wait the entire console generation for it to even have it be part of the conversation again. It's just, man, Nintendo really frankly, I hope Nintendo's embarrassed for how they handled this game. Like, they should not have announced it so soon. It's just, I'm about to just ramble on. So before I just do that, I'm just gonna bring it back to you, Rob.
No, it's okay. The rambling and the ranting is good, and it's welcome, and it's warranted. I personally, and I know we've talked about this in the past, I don't feel the same level of like big aggravation about it. I'm definitely more disappointed than I am angry. But I have that part of me as well, simply because it's my favorite game series. It's your favorite game series. We both love Metroid Prime. I think it's both of our favorite games ever. So having a fourth game, not including the 3DS spin-offs, but like having a fourth game coming is so unbelievably exciting. And you make such a good point. I even referenced it, I know, in the past few weeks on one of my videos, that essentially the announcement of Metroid Prime 4 is basically as old as the Nintendo Switch is, which when you line it up in your brain that way, it just becomes so shocking and surprising. And you're like, holy cow, they really are. Metroid Prime 4's existence is as old as the time we've been playing on the Nintendo Switch. And I've said a couple of times over the years that I think the reason they did that and why it doesn't make me so like viscerally angry, but it does still make me like upset and frustrated, is because I feel like they announced this game at the time they did to let people know when the Switch was a new console that they were making a lot of exciting games. It's something that I've referred to over the years as like a goodwill announcement or a good faith announcement, obviously to Metroid fans, but also I think just to Nintendo fans. And when the Switch was brand new, we have to remember, it's easy for us to forget nowadays, but that was coming right off of the Wii U, which I love, but it wasn't successful. And so I think that part of Nintendo's game plan so early to make the Switch successful is to instill confidence in us, people like us, and Metroid fans and game fans and Nintendo fans, by saying, look at all these great games that are coming. Like, you're all playing Zelda, you all love Zelda, but what can you look forward to? And I think the promise of Metroid was a big thing for them to do at the time, but to your point, it's very obvious that they announced it before they had anything concrete. They knew that they had probably signed the contract to say, we're going to make a new Metroid game for the Switch, so let's just tell the people now so they understand it's going to be a great console. Little did they know it was clearly not going to go well. They scrapped the version they had. They gave it back to Retro. And so, without beating a dead horse for stuff that we all already know, I just think that that's kind of why that happened. I mean, I definitely think that they learned a valuable lesson, which I know is a point that you made as well. I've long said that it's hard for me to completely blame them because the restart, the rebooting, the switching teams is the kind of thing that, in general, you can't really foresee. And clearly they didn't foresee it. And in a perfect world where that didn't happen, I think Metroid Prime 4 would have already released, as sad as that is to probably, years ago, really. I mean, I think it probably would have been like a 2020 game, potentially, 2019, 2020.
Maybe at the same time as Bayonetta 3, since they were announced at the same time. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, what a catastrophe that was. I will say that as far as my percentage, to get back to kind of the larger topic on
right.
how we would feel if the game does ultimately end up skipping the Switch entirely. As far as my personal percentage guess on if that's going to happen, I lean, I don't know, I would say there's about a 35 to 40% chance I think it will happen, that it will skip the Switch, but more than half of me, I'm about 60 or 65% thinks it's not going to skip the Switch, which I know will make you happy because that's the real thing that you want, and obviously the point here is you very much passionately feel the game should release on the Switch in some fashion. And I mean, I'm just gonna double down on something I've been saying for a long time, and I know a lot of people have said the same. It's hard for me to not see Metroid Prime 4 being a cross-generational release, you know?
Right.
If there's any truth to a Switch 2 or a new console coming out in the next, you know, like I said, 6 to 18 months, by the end of 2024, which I think most of us think is most likely, it just makes too much sense for that game to be a cross-generational release, and so that's why I'm not putting it off of the table that the game skips the Switch, because Nintendo might make a really ballsy move, and they might do that, and there's a lot of reasons why I think that they would make that choice. But at the end of the day, I think maybe even because, you know, like you like to talk about a lot, they did announce the game for the Switch. I mean, the logo that we saw in 2017 said now in development for the Switch.
Right.
So I think between that, and I think between the titanic install base of the Switch, it makes sense for them to ultimately release that game on the console. But the next-gen proposition, and there's a lot of debate people have about, you know, if Metroid Prime 4 as a launch day game for the Switch makes sense or not. I think it does, because
Yes.
I think it's, yeah, and so I do want to hear your thoughts on that, but I'll say, I think it makes sense less because Metroid Prime 4 would help sell the Switch 2, but because the Switch 2 could help sell Metroid Prime 4.
Bingo.
That's always, yeah, so go on that. Tell me what you think about that, because that's been my thought. Yeah.
I also just, when you mentioned that the game was in development for Switch, that's like the first thing we heard about it. I thought like of a hilarious scenario where if the next system is indeed called the Switch something, and it's only for that system, Nintendo would say, hey, we said it was in development for the Switch, we didn't say which one.
We didn't lie.
But yeah, like you said, the Switch 2 would help sell Metroid Prime 4, which I think, and there's two ways I see this, why it should be cross-gen. Because, of course, what you said, like people will see, like, the Switch 2, and it's just like, why should I buy this? And they'll see, like, this game, Metroid Prime 4, looks absolutely fantastic. It's going to boast, like, it's going to utilize the absolute horsepower of that unit. And they'll think,
I hope so.
Not only that, it's going to be like a hardcore type of game. It's like, it's more of a more mature franchise, for one of Nintendo's most mature franchises. And then people will probably jump in and be like, oh, yeah, this looks cool. This is a true next-gen experience, like that. But I still think it should be on Switch, not just because they said it was in development for the Switch, but because that would, I don't know, it would be cheating the franchise otherwise. That Switch has a huge install base, and to just launch it only on a brand new system would be completely, it would hurt the sales of the game pretty much, right? Like, all those 3 million people that bought Metroid Dread, all those, like, 1.5 million people that bought Metroid Prime Remastered, a lot of those people aren't going to be able to buy a new Switch. So you're basically leaving those people out to dry, and you're hurting the sales of Prime 4. That's why I think cross-gen is, like, the best way for it to go. And it also just can't be, for some reason, like, Switch only, because then you have a Samus Return situation on your hands. So
yeah, and so to me, that's the most obvious answer. I have no problem saying that. I understand why some people would even prefer a next-gen only version of this game. There's all these concerns that the power of the Switch or the lack of power of the Switch would potentially hold back the quality of the game. And I understand that concern, and there is a part of me that agrees with it. But when I just think about what's best for the success of the Metroid franchise, that's where I almost 100% fall in line with you, you know, and I've gone on record saying that in the past as well, that it's what's good for the franchise, and the install base of the Switch, the excitement of the Switch 2 having a launch version, especially if it takes advantage of the power, because that's the other trick about the cross-gen nature, and that's the one concern I have when I play that out in my head. You know, I get excited because it's like, great, it's going to have the best chance at success. You know, like you said, we're on a great roll with Metroid. Dread was a new game, and it was super successful. Metroid Prime Remastered was also very, very successful in its own right. Metroid Prime 4, in theory, would be a third kick-ass Metroid release in a row over the past 2 years, which is, it's been over a decade since we've seen something like that. But I always have this lingering concern. If they do that, does the Switch 2 version really take advantage, or do we get kind of a Twilight Princess scenario where I love that game, and I loved the Wii version. That's the version I played. But in retrospect, it really wasn't like a next-gen different version from the original, not the original, but the GameCube release. You know, the hardware it was designed for. they basically look almost the exact same. And they added the motion control, which was very cool for a few things, mostly like aiming, like your arrow and your slingshot and stuff. And they reversed the world to match Link's hand and your sword swinging hand. But it was really like the same game. There was no like other like visual or gameplay advantage other than a few minor motion tweaks. And I would hope that if we get a Switch 2 version of Metroid Prime 4 alongside of a Switch version, that there is some kind of significant difference. I mean, the visual update will be one of the biggest selling points to that game, and also to the Switch 2. Like, they complement each other best if the power of the Switch 2 is on display with Metroid Prime 4, and if Metroid Prime 4 is showing how beautiful it can look because it's on the Switch 2. But I have that fear, like I said with Twilight Princess, what if it's virtually the same game and it looks almost the exact same? I mean, Breath of the Wild is actually maybe a better comparison than Twilight Princess now that I think about it. There's basically no difference to my knowledge. Maybe like some audio stuff I think I heard between the Wii U and the Switch version.
Yeah.
So I do think about that, but if I don't focus on the negative outcome and I think of a more positive outcome, where there's a great version that releases on the Switch and it's something we all love, but then there also is this Switch 2 version and it looks better and it plays better and it just is a better game. That's a win across the board, and we've got a couple of great Metroid Prime 4 options on the table. And this also depends on if they would release the same day, too, because we can't forget there could be a situation where they don't even release on the same day, and that's a whole different ball of wax.
That was Twilight Princess, right? Twilight Princess,
which was,
I think, released later, right? On GameCube?
Yeah, it was Wii first, and then it was GameCube, I think, a few months later.
Bizarre. I don't think in this day and age that would happen. I think they would release day and date on both platforms. I think Prime 4 would release day and date on both platforms.
I tend to agree with you, but the only reason... I think the only situation where I could see them not releasing same day is if the Switch version of Prime 4 would release before the Switch 2. So that's the one thing where maybe it releases, I mean, I'm just going to make up some dates. Let's say it releases June next year on the Switch, but the Switch 2 doesn't release until September or October. And so maybe there's just several months later, the same day the Switch 2 releases, there's also a Switch 2 version, a definitive edition or whatever, of Prime 4.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so that's the one. I've played that out in my head many times, and I'm like, I wonder if that could be something that they would do.
I'm going to be honest with you, Rob. I would prefer that 100% over
really?
launching with the same. Because when we talk about cross-gen releases, I think like same day. Like, I think that's what everyone talks about when they mention cross-gen. But I would totally not mind if it just came out on Switch first and then Switch 2 later, like when it launched, or like if it receives like a next-gen patch or whatever, because that gives me another reason to play it again.
Well, the next-gen patch thing, though, and I don't mean to cut you off, but I'll just say that kind of changes things in a unique way, too, because would the Switch 2 version of that game be just a patch for the Switch version if it's backwards compatible? Would it be free? Would it be something you purchase? Or would they make you buy only a Switch 2 cartridge? That's another $60 or $70, you know?
That's a good question. That really just depends on what the system is. But what I picture in my head is like if it is another system that uses the Switch branding, I think of it like an Xbox One to Series X and S scenario where there's not really any distinction between the two in terms of packaging, in terms of like the discs, because you see the games on retail now and they just have Xbox on the box.
It drives me crazy. I really don't like it personally.
Oh, you don't? I think it's
not for Xbox. No, I don't like it.
I think it's fine. I think it's relatively inoffensive to me. They also did that with. They also re-released Xbox 360 games with Xbox One packaging because you could play them on there. Really interesting stuff. But not to get totally sidetracked here, I think that does depend, of course, on what the Switch 2 is, if it is even a Switch 2, which I think, like, why wouldn't it be? Just even history, like, shows like Nintendo likes to iterate on their previous successes, like Wii to Wii U, which was a failure, but I don't think that's what's going to happen here. Like, Switch 2,
it'll be a success. Yeah, I think they know. I mean, there's all this conversation we have about how they need to treat this transition very carefully, and they've acknowledged it, and everyone who's a fan that follows this stuff, we all know it. Like, please, again, and I love the Wii U, so when I say this, please keep that in mind. But please don't pull another Wii U. I don't want that to happen. It would be very, very damaging to Nintendo right now. And I will say, as far as the comparison you make with the Xbox stuff, part of the reason I've just personally never loved it, and why I wouldn't be like mad if they do that with the Switch 2 kind of thing, but I don't like it as much, is because I don't like that there's so much like how do I say this a different way? I like more of a delineation between what is a last-gen console and what is a current console. I think it gets a little just kind of confusing when I see just all these random Xbox covers and boxes and no difference. I like the idea of knowing, okay, here is the Xbox One version of a game, and here would be the Xbox Series version of a game. The same way there's I think there's a PS4 version of God of War Ragnarok, and there's a PS5 version of God of War Ragnarok, you know?
What's interesting, though, is that the PS4 version of God of War Ragnarok, I think, has a label on the box saying PS5 upgrade available. So, yeah, it's really
I think it might. So
you
you make a good point. It doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. It's more just a personal preference of I like seeing the branding and the packaging and knowing that the product is specifically made for XYZ generation. Right. But again, it doesn't really super matter. So I guess to kind of close out with the end here, let me ask you this question. If they release, I feel like I know the answer. If they release same day Metroid Prime 4, 2 different versions, it's not a backwards compatibility thing, would you buy the Switch version, or would you buy only the Switch 2 version? What would you do?
I would buy only the Switch 2 version. And so it's kind of interesting that I say, like, it can't skip the Switch, because I'm more than likely not going to play the Switch version unless that scenario you said happens where, like, they release the Switch version first before the Switch 2 even is out, which is a situation I'd vastly prefer. And especially because Prime Remastered looks so good on Switch anyway. That's another point I wanted to bring up. I really, that alleviated my worries for this game on Switch completely. Like,
Same.
Every worry I had about Prime 4 looking good on Switch is gone, because that game is just the best, like, undisputed best looking game on Switch. I know that makes some people mad, me saying that, but I'm sorry, the truth hurts. Luigi's Mansion 3 still looks great, though, I'll say that. However, so back to your question, I'd still play it on the next gen Switch, the next gen console, whatever it's gonna be. But when I say it should be cross-gen, that's me as a Metroid. I'm saying that as a Metroid fan who wants this franchise to succeed as best as it can. And if you completely abandon the Switch install base in favor of the new Switch 2 install base, that will hurt its sales. Maybe not in the long run. Maybe it'll gain like slowly, gradually over time, like more people playing that game as more people buy Switch 2s. So maybe that's a point you could argue against me, for sure. But I still feel like it would behoove Nintendo to release it, to get this game into the hands of as many people as they can, release it on the Switch and the Switch 2, and call it a day.
Yeah. It definitely comes down to, you know, if you desire the series to be successful. And since you and I both do, and honestly most Metroid fans do feel that way, I think that's why it's easy to say, I want the Switch 2 version. I want the better looking version, the next gen version, but I sure hope that last gen version releases so that the 130 million people who have a Switch can still buy and play that. And they also, by the way, happen to deliver on that promise from 2017. And there's another element to that too, which is, we don't know, and sometimes I almost lose sleep at night thinking about this, and I dread this. I bet you know what I'm going to say. How hard it's going to be to probably buy a freaking Switch 2 whenever that thing releases. I dread console releases nowadays. It is absurd. It is. I mean, unless Nintendo is just doing everything in their power to make sure that they have just a boatload of consoles available to avoid the pitfalls of PS5 and Series X. And I know COVID shortage and all that stuff was a real thing. I don't deny that. But I also think that it probably would have been true even without that, to be honest. Yep. It's just kind of the way things go nowadays. And it's in one hand, it's great because, you know, there's so many game fans out there. There's so many of us that love the hobby and want to buy the newest, hottest thing. But at the same time, it's so counterintuitive to people enjoying the hobby because it's hard to buy stuff. It's hard to find things when they launch. And, like, it's good to have high demand, but try to meet your demand better, please. And all these websites we order from online, it's like, oh, my God, please be better about it. GameStop, stop forcing $700 bundles on people to buy a PS5. You know, all these things. And so, to connect this back to Metroid, that is something else that could hurt a next-gen version of Metroid Prime 4 if it releases around the launch of the Switch 2 or same day as the Switch 2.
Right.
Is that if it's only next-gen, I mean, yeah, that's going to severely limit the amount of people that could buy it, because there will be millions of people who want to Switch 2 who would probably buy a Metroid Prime 4 but might not be able to find it for months upon months upon months, you know?
That's a good point.
Also, yeah, go ahead if you're...
I was going to say, that is a good point, because I never thought of it that way. I totally forgot about that, which is why I hope that the report from VGC is correct, where they say that Nintendo's looking for a latter half 2024 release. So mainly because they want to ensure the demand for this is feasible. And I hope that that's true.
I agree, and I obviously was thinking about VGC's report as well. I think that the idea of them taking even longer to release it, if you think about it, that kind of insinuates that they might be ready to go to manufacturing like in the next couple of months here, but that they're going to be sitting on units for like 7, 8, 9 months or what have you before they reveal it or they release it or whatever, so that they have a huge stockpile. But on the flip side, I also think that they could go another way to be successful, which would be if they release the console earlier in the year and they get over the initial wave. Let's say they release it in like June, right? Like early summer or something. And here's the Switch 2. It's on store shelves. There's a couple million available. We're all going to have the mad dash. I'm not even talking about Prime 4 at this point, but they released that Switch 2. And yeah, it's going to be hard to find, but you get over that mad dash, and that could give them more time by the time holiday rolls around to have another huge stockpile. But a lot of people, millions of people, already got through the initial rush. So they've cooled down the initial rush of people trying to buy it day one. And if day one isn't holiday, then maybe holiday becomes a higher stock and demand is going to still be incredibly strong, but maybe will have cooled down a little bit. It's just something I've thought about on how it could go either way. They could release next holiday, or they could release early and then have a huge stock for holiday by the end of the year because it's already had its day one, which does mirror what happened with the Switch in 2017, right? Day one was in March. It wasn't over the holiday, but people were still buying them over the holiday. And so... And that's, we don't want to make this a Switch 2 conversation, but it does also kind of relate to a next-gen Metroid Prime 4. It's all very interesting to think about. I'll kind of just wrap up by saying I feel the same as you. Obviously, the Switch 2 version is the one that I want. Part of me thinks as an overly supportive Metroid fan, I would buy both versions. I don't know if that's something that would be feasible. It would just depend on what the release timing looks like, but... Yeah, I want to support a next-gen Nintendo console. I want to support the next-gen version of Metroid Prime 4. And like we said earlier, especially if it's truly taking advantage of that power.
And if for some reason I get stuck with the Switch version, because I couldn't pick up a Switch 2 at launch or whatever, if that even launches the same day, I still think the Switch version is going to look really darn good. Like, look at Prime Remastered. But for some reason, people think, hey, it's a remaster. That doesn't count as having good graphics. I'm just like,
that's
what?
Preposterous.
I don't get
I've heard
people.
I don't either. And I've heard arguments from some folks that say, oh, because it's it's like smaller environments, like the rooms are smaller that it's built in. And so since it's not like a huge open world, that makes it less impressive. And I just think that's... I mean, look, everyone can feel how they want, but I just don't buy that because it's not about that to me. It's about what is the visual hitting your eyeballs. That's all I care about. Yeah.
Like, if a game is set only in a tiny room, but that tiny room looks so good, guess what? The game looks good. I'm sorry.
Yeah. You know what? A great example is PT. Did you ever play that? Did you ever have a chance?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. I mean, it's incredible, and it's set in one repeating hallway for like 80% of it.
Yes.
But it looks great. And some people feel like it looks photorealistic, and I would honestly agree. Mm-hmm. And so who cares how small the space is or whatever tricks we know they're doing behind the scenes. I just care about what does the net result look like when it, like I said, when it hits my eyeballs. And, Luigi's Mansion 3 looks fantastic. Pikmin 4 looks fantastic. But to me, Metroid Prime Remastered just blows everything out of the water. Now, I will say, though, Metroid Prime 4, I don't know if it's how they're going to achieve that the same way, though, because they're going to
True.
be using more modern tricks, right? They're going to have to be tapping more into the power of the current Switch, and there probably will be larger environments that might affect it in some ways, but not to the point where I'm concerned. I still think even the Switch version of Prime 4 will almost for sure be the best looking game. It's going to look better than Metroid Prime Remastered. It'll be the best looking game on the Switch, and then we hope we get that Switch 2 showcase out of it, you know?
I will be sad if it's 30 frames per second on Switch, but if
I don't
that's
think
the
they
first,
can do that.
you don't think they do that still?
I don't think they. It's a great thing to bring up. I struggle to think that they would do that because I feel like part of the experience Nintendo and Retro Studios has always believed in with the Prime games is that 60 frames per second feel.
True.
And so, I mean, maybe they prove us wrong and they change it up and they're willing to sacrifice frame rate for the Switch version of the game. But I just, right here and now where we know nothing, my optimistic fanboy side says they're not going to do that, and they're going to make sure that even the Switch version is 60 frames per second.
I hope so too. But I think I want to ask you a question before we go.
Yeah.
So with all this talk about like Metroid Prime 4 being cross-gen, or like it possibly even being a launch title for next gen along with the Switch version, as if the Switch version for some reason comes out like before next gen, whatever. Do you still believe, Rob, that we're gonna see this game this year, like trailer wise, like we're finally gonna see what this game looks like, or do you think Nintendo's gonna wait until the next gen Switch is announced, or do you also think we're gonna see that this year? Loaded questions, but basically it just boils down to: do you still think we'll see Prime 4?
Very, very loaded questions. Honestly, yeah, I lean towards, I'm not locked, but I lean towards thinking Prime 4 will get its reveal this year.
I hope so.
I just think, and it could even be something very small, like Bayonetta 3's first teaser, you know, if you remember that. Yeah. It was just, granted, that was a little bit similar to Metroid Prime 4's reveal as well at E3, where it was kind of mostly a logo. Right. But Bayonetta 3 had a little bit more, you know, it was like some CG mock-ups and her feet were there and she does some shooting and someone gets killed or whatever in the background. And so I feel like at worst, they don't show it to us this year. But in a world where they do reveal it this year, which I think is mostly where I'm leaning towards, I think the worst case scenario is something akin to Bayonetta's 3 reveal, but maybe slightly more substantial. Like they wouldn't hide the look of Samus. Maybe they would outright show what Samus looks like, give us an idea of that visual element. They might not show us any gameplay, but if they give us something, and I think it would also end with a 2024 at the end of it, you know? It's going to be some kind of look at Samus. It's going to be 20 to 30 seconds long, no gameplay, which is not normal for Nintendo, but I think everything around Prime 4 has been not normal. So I think they would do that, and then they would just say 2024 at the end, something like that. Or best case scenario is something a little bit more significant. Maybe they do give us something that teases gameplay, and they talk about what, you know, if they plan on confirming a Switch 2 this year, which there is still a part of me that thinks that could happen, then they might be willing to, you know, pull the veil back a little bit more and show gameplay because they can, you know, I've said this for a long time. I think that the re-reveal of Prime 4 and a confirmation of a Switch 2 really might be tied to each other. So they could do it as part of the whole thing. Maybe they have a 5-minute presentation at the end of the year, because I don't think the Switch 2 is going to be revealed in a Nintendo Direct. I've never believed it. Yeah, I'm glad to hear you say that, because a lot of people think it's possible, and I understand why, but I just don't see them doing that. So if they have a 5 to 10 minute presentation that's like, hey, we're going to give you a glimpse and talk about the next console, and they're going to drop some of these little teasy things about a couple of games, including a Prime 4, that could happen this year. Similar to the Metroid Prime 3 thing they did at E3 in 2005. I tweeted that little video clip like 2 or 3 months ago. They could do something like that. You know, I think I had tagged you in that. So those are my thoughts. Where are you going with that? What are you thinking about it?
Yeah, a part of me is just so let down by that June Direct. Like, yeah, great Direct
you were very
on its
defeated.
own. I was done. I was livid, pretty much. Just like, dude, what are you waiting for, Nintendo? Come on. Yeah. You announced this game 6 years ago. But, so, a part of me is just like, giving up all hope for anything anytime soon. And I don't know if that's just me trying to like protect myself from further disappointment, even though I'm just Yeah, even though I'm just disappointed in my heart all the time with this game right now.
Yeah.
So I want you to be right. So I'm not going to say that you're wrong at all because I want you to be right. So
Yeah.
I'm not
But
sure.
you're doubtful.
I'm doubtful. I'm just very doubtful of anything. I refuse to be optimistic about this game anymore because I want to see it, and Nintendo's just
understandable.
not giving me anything.
Yeah. I mean, at this point, we almost might see like the next Mercury Steam 2D game revealed, before that happens.
Seriously.
Which would be really, which would be really, really crazy. So, I don't know. I mean, I'll end by saying, I am still optimistic that we're going to see it this year. I just feel like the stars have been aligning for this year for a long time. Just in my brain, doesn't mean that I'm right, but it's just been feeling that way for a good while for me. Mm-hmm. And, we've got a good couple of months to go before the year is over. We know we've got one last significant Nintendo Direct in us before the year is over. And I really think that, barring a Switch 2 reveal in a separate, 5 or 10 minute presentation or whatever, barring that, I think that as far as a Nintendo Direct goes, I do think that it could be time, I mean, or if they didn't do Prime 4, they might do Prime 2. So maybe that becomes the
that's
Metroid,
I feel like that's more what I'm betting for a September Direct is just Prime 2 remastered.
It could be, which would be great. I mean, I think we'd be elated at that.
Right. Oh yeah, that's the game, right? Like I know the Metroid series has had a great run, like this entire Switch life cycle. We got Dread, we got Prime Remastered, but in the end, there's only one thing that's been on my mind these past 6 years, and that's Prime 4.
Metroid Prime 4. And Samus Returns did release after the Switch came out. I just wanted to add that, even though it wasn't a Switch title.
That's right. Thank you. Thank you for reminding me.
You're welcome. It did release in the Switch era, so I love to bring that game up because I always think about it. I think it's a great game that people missed out on, so we need that on the Switch too.
Yeah, like they're giving us Dark Moon on Switch, but they can't give us Metroid Samus Returns. Come on, man.
I honestly think it will happen. That's also me being optimistic, but I bet it's going to be in their card. So,
I mean, I believe you now more than ever because like they're releasing, like I said, they're releasing Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon like out of nowhere this late in its life. So I'm like, oh, I guess anything's possible then.
Yeah, we can certainly hope so. So anyway, like I said, a lot of options on the table. We both have very strong feelings about this because we are two huge Metroid and Metroid Prime fans. And Nintendo has been putting us through a roller coaster of emotions for over half a decade around this game. And boy, do we want to see it. I hope it shows up at the end of this year. Joey, it sounds like you think it's going to happen sometime next year. But if we play it in the next 12 months, I think that would be really great. So we can cross our fingers for that. So I will say thank you, of course, for joining me for this chat. This was a lot of fun to ramble and rant a little bit about Metroid. Obviously, Joey's a part of Game Explain, so you can find his content and all the awesome podcasts that every one of those guys does over there. No one needs my small little channel to promote Game Explain, but I'm doing it anyway. So there you go. So thanks again for joining, Joey.
Of course. Thank you for having me. I'm always down to talk Metroid anytime.
And we will do this sometime in the future. So thanks for tuning in, guys. I will see you next time.
Bye-bye.